Hello, and welcome to Same Crime, Different Time. I'm Jennifer Chambers. You know that I'm passionate about uncovering the truth. Here, we're taking that passion to the dark heart of the Pacific Northwest. As a true crime and historical writer, I've spent years immersed in the chilling archives of this region. Each week, we'll explore cases, both ancient and modern, of murder, unexplained events, strange places, and those who have simply vanished. We'll dig into the research, connecting the dots between past and present, revealing the threads of mystery that weave through our incredible, yet often unsettling, landscape. Prepare to be captivated as we discover that while times may change, the darkest aspects of human nature remain hauntingly the same. They said that she lived just beyond where the road ended. They said that she kept to herself. They said that she knew things. And when something went wrong, a sickness, a storm, a child who wouldn't wake, they said her name. Because every town eventually decides who its witch will be. This is Same Crime, Different Time. I'm your host, Jen Chambers. Today, this is one of my favorite things to research. The intersection between feminism and crime and history. Let's begin. Part 1. A city built on edges. Late 1800s, Victoria is a place of contradictions. This is Victoria, BC, in Canada. It's a gorgeous place still. Refined on the surface. It's got tea and manners and a British identity, even today. But in the late 1800s, just beneath that, it was a thin veneer that covered up a frontier. Transient workers, gold rush, aftershocks, and the displacement of indigenous communities, especially the Lekwungen people. And I believe I'm saying that correctly. I did look it up, but it's Lekwungen. And I want to respect the indigenous tribes, so I'm trying to say it properly. But they were displaced from that area at the time. And in places like this, order is fragile. And that means that suspicion comes easily. Part 2, the real women. There is no single documented witch, although there is lore about the Witch of Vancouver. There are women who come very close. The spiritualist women. By the 1870s and 1890s, it's a big period, but Victoria, like much of North America itself, was caught up in the practice of spiritualism. This was the idea that you could get answers from beyond the veil. Mediums held seances, and women especially became conduits to the unseen. And this gave women a little bit of power in a society and a time when they had very little. Newspapers like the British Colonist covered these women with a mix of fascination and unease. One article described one local medium as, quote, a woman of peculiar habits, claiming communication with spirits not visible to others. That phrasing matters because it's not admiration. It's kind of phrased as a warning, right? Those men were afraid. There's also the idea of the reclusive widow. Local records from the time and histories from that region reference, as everywhere, women living alone, sometimes on the outskirts of town. These women were widows or laborers, or they were just women without family. One account that's echoed in regional historical compilations describes, quote, a solitary woman dwelling near the wooded edge, avoided by neighbors, rumored to possess unnatural knowledge, unquote. So there's no crime, there's no evidence, just someone who's solitary and different, a little distance from the regular crowd, and then people's imagination filled in the gaps. Of course, there's also the icon of the healer. Across the Pacific Northwest and elsewhere, women practiced herbal medicine. Have done since time immemorial, right? And sometimes in our area that drew from indigenous knowledge, sometimes from European folk traditions. There's an anthropologist named Frank Boas, and I understand that historical research is often problematic. I can't vet for this particular resource, but I did look at some work by the anthropologist Frank Boas, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions either. I haven't read enough of it, but there was a documentation about how settlers frequently misunderstood indigenous spiritual and healing roles. And that sounds exactly right to me. That misunderstandings is what labeled them as sorcery or witchcraft. So imagine there's a woman who knows plants, who treats illnesses, and who doesn't defer to doctors. In the wrong context, that something becomes dangerous. And I like that Boas documented how the indigenous spiritual and healing roles were specifically misunderstood. So I appreciate that. Part 3 is the other story. There's a parallel thread here. Let's widen the lens. This isn't just Victoria. Across the Pacific Northwest and beyond, there's a pattern. Women being labeled as something other. This is a very different area, but take Mary Ellen Pleasant. She was sometimes called the Voodoo Queen of San Francisco. She was a powerful, wealthy Black woman in the 19th century, also accused of witchcraft, manipulation, dark influences, but there was very little evidence and a lot of fear. I would guess a lot of that may have been resentment because she was powerful and wealthy and Black. There's countless unnamed women in rural communities who are called witches simply because they live outside of the rules. They're different. It's a different time and place to the Pacific Northwest, but it's kind of the same story. It's just women who have a little bit of power being misunderstood. Same story. Now, part 4, let's talk about how this particular legend formed. Let's bring it back to Vancouver Island. So if you take like that icon of the spiritualist and the widow and the healer and blend them together over time, and then add, whispers and stories and secondhand warnings and a few things that are unexplained and taken out of context, and something shifts. There's no woman. It's no longer a person. It becomes a legend. The Witch of Vancouver Island. Children are told, don't go in the woods. Travelers hear there's a woman who watches from the trees. And just like that, there's a legend that locks into place. Part 5, what the newspapers revealed. It's kind of interesting. If you read between the lines of 19th century reporting, and I love to read old newspapers. I think they're so fascinating. You start to see a pattern. These women, and many women, are described as eccentric. They're unnatural. They're given to strange beliefs. These are common descriptors in this era of reporting. Those are actual quotations. Women being, quote unquote, eccentric, unnatural, or given to strange beliefs. They're not neutral words. They're social signals. They tell the readers of the newspaper that this person is outside the norm and different. And once that idea spreads even more, it doesn't take much for it to become something darker. Part 6, Indigenous layers. And there's another piece we can't ignore. The land itself already held stories here. Among the Lekwungen people and neighboring nations, there are long-standing traditions that involve spiritual power and transformation and beings that are connected to the natural world. But these stories were often misinterpreted and simplified or overwritten by colonial narratives. So what settlers called a witch may have intersected, however loosely, with stories that they didn't understand. Part 7, theories. So who was the Witch of Vancouver Island? The legend. Theory 1 is a composite women. Not one person, but many of them, kind of layered together until they became one single figure. Theory 2 is there was a real woman who was just distorted. Maybe there was a specific individual who was maybe reclusive or unconventional, and her story was exaggerated over time. Theory number 3 is probably likely. It's the idea of colonial fear that's given a face. It was a way for people to project their anxiety about wilderness and the indigenous presence and women who were outside of people's control, outside of men's control. So put those all together and project it onto a single figure that's nebulous and scary, and there you go. Also, there's theory 4, which is a story that fills a need. Every one of these communities, these pioneer communities, created boundaries, and sometimes you enforce those boundaries with a story. It helps you stay inside. It makes you follow the rules. Or you become her, the other, the witch, the scary thing that lives in the woods. I mean, there's a real practical nature to that kind of a story, right? But it's just unfortunate that it's tied to women. But it makes sense. So part 8, what is this really? I'm not talking about a murder case, not in a traditional murder sense, but something's lost here. You know, these women and these people who are alluded to are reduced and flattened and turned into something easier to fear than to understand. So these actual women's stories have been lost. There's a moment somewhere in every legend like this where a real person disappears, not physically, but their name fades and their life blurs. And then what replaces it is a story that people feel safer believing. The witch of Vancouver Island that people told children to make them stay inside and women to make them stay in line may never have cast that actual spell, but she was transformed all the same. She became a warning and a shadow, and she was something less human and more useful. Turned into something more useful for the patriarchy. I love learning about these kinds of things. It's almost more interesting when there isn't one particular piece of evidence for something, because it becomes really a way to understand how women were treated at that time and how women continue to be treated. Fascinating. I think it's so interesting. Thank you so much for being with me today. It's not exactly a scary story, but it is pretty interesting. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll be back next time.
Thanks for listening today. Please review and rate wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps out the show. And please leave us a voicemail at the Spotify link. Also, you can always feel free to send us an email at scdtmail@gmail.com or www.jennifer-chambers.com.